Well, good morning, everybody. So glad that you are here today. And if you weren't here last weekend, we missed you, but we did talk about probably one of the most familiar, one of the most famous stories in the entire Bible. And even if you're not a Jesus-loving, church-going, Bible-toting person, you know the story that we looked at last weekend, because we looked at the story of David and Goliath. You may not believe the story. You may think the story is a fairy tale, but what is certifiable, what is certain, is that a guy named David did indeed live, and he did become the second king over the nation of Israel around 1100 BC. And his rise to fame was very, very noticeable. You remember the story? Middle schooler David walks into a battlefield carrying Jimmy Johns for his older brothers who were soldiers in the army. And there he's confronted by this 9-foot giant, big, beefy, bulky, burly, lots of BO, giant named Goliath. And this Goliath guy is shouting obscenities at the nation of Israel and their God. And David's like, who is this guy and why are you allowing him to do that? Nobody wants to fight him. So what does David do? He steps onto that battle. And with just a slingshot and a few stones, he downs the giant. And just like that, David goes from a nobody that nobody knows to a somebody that everybody knows. He goes from a zero to a hero overnight. He goes from just a lowly little shepherd boy to being a giant slayer that the people in the nation of Israel were cheering. And when we pick up the story, David is on top of the world. David's world could not be any better. For David, the sun is shining. The fish are biting. The flowers are still blooming. And the birds are singing. That's David's world. He is living his best life ever. And maybe some of you across our campuses, maybe that's your story right now. Maybe you're living your best life ever. Maybe you are on top of the world. Life couldn't get any better for you. And if that's where you're at, what we want to say to you today is very simply this: we hate you. We're honest at Crossroads. We hate you. No, we don't hate you. We just don't like you, okay? No, that's not true either. Let me be a little more pastoral. We're actually happy for you. I am happy for you. If that's where you're at, if you're on top of the world right now, I am happy for you. I hope you milk this time for all it's worth. I hope it continues for you. I hope the fish keep biting and the sun keeps shining and the birds keep singing and all those other. I hope that's all continues for you. But what we all know, especially if we've been around the block of life a few times, is we know those seasons end, don't we? And David's season of being on top of the world, best life ever, is coming to an end, because David's life goes from sunshine to tsunami, just like that. Oh, he's living in the palace right now. Yeah. He's living in the palace right now. He's married to King Saul's daughter. His best friend is Jonathan, King Saul's son. He's been told by the prophet Samuel that he's going to become the king someday. Yeah, all that's true and all that's good, but it's all coming to an end. And I want us to look today. In fact, this is a 2-part sermon, just so you know. We'll look at part 1 and part 2 next week of how David deals with this difficult tsunami that comes into his life. We're going to look at David, how Bible hero David responded when the bottom dropped out of life, when the sun quit shining, when the birds stopped singing, when the flowers all died, when the fish stopped biting. We're going to see what Bible hero Dave, how he handles it. And let me give you a little clue: not very well. And the reason why we're going to look at it is for really 2 reasons. Because I want you to be prepared. Because that season, if it's not in your life right now, that tsunami season will come to you someday. And I want you to be ready for it. I want to be ready for it. But I don't want you just to be ready for it. I don't want you just to get through it. I want you to actually grow from it. I don't want you just to get through it. I want you to grow from it. And to do that, we've got to learn from Dave, from Bible hero Dave. So with all of that, by way of introduction, I would invite you right now to grab a Bible and turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 21. 1 Samuel chapter 21, all right? And as you're turning there, let me get you, fill a few blanks in. Let me give you a little bit of the backstory right now. Yeah, David's life is changing because what happens is you would think that Saul, the king, would be happy with David. Why? Because the battle against Goliath was actually Saul's fight, but he didn't do it. But David stepped in and took the Goliath down on Saul's behalf. You would think that Saul would be happy with David, but Saul becomes very, very, very jealous with David. Pretty much because the crowds are cheering for David everywhere he turns. And the Bible tells us, the scriptures tell us that Saul gets infected with a jealous spirit. And this jealous spirit grows and it grows and it grows in Saul's heart to the point where he begins to resent and hate David, and he tries to kill David. He tries to kill David. In fact, and this is just right out of the scriptures, Saul tries 6 times unsuccessfully to kill David. And at some point, after 6 unsuccessful times, a light bulb goes off in David's head. And David says, I don't think Saul likes me. And what does David do? He runs, he bolts. He knows he's got to get out of Dodge because Saul's trying to kill him. And Saul puts out a contract on David's life. And David now becomes a fugitive. But I want you to think about what David has lost here in just a very short period of time. He lost his residency or his bedroom in the palace. He lost his job. He lost his wife. He lost his best friend. He lost his spiritual mentor. And if he would have lost his truck and his dog, he would have been able to write a country western song. Yeah, I thought some of you would fill that joke in for me. Yeah, and I want you to think about this. He's lost a lot. He was living in a palace. He's sleeping in a king-size bed, pillow-top mattress. He was eating the best of food, drinking the best of wine, surrounded by friends, his wife. He had it all. And now, he's on the run. He's a fugitive. And probably the most important piece of this puzzle for you to hear is this. None of this was David's fault. He did everything right. He was serving King Saul. And now he's on the run. And in 1 Samuel chapter 21, we get to see how David responds to this whole thing. And what we're going to see together is that David, Bible hero Dave, begins to crack. And I'm so glad that Samuel, who's writing these things down, and I'm so glad that the authors of Scripture do not kind of, gloss over the faults and the flaws of the heroes of the Bible. They don't do that. They don't color the Bible heroes with just bright, positive strokes. No, what we're going to see here is a David who's very, very real. A David who's as real as you are, and a David who's as real as I am. Chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, we're going to get to it, I promise, is not a Kodak moment for David. And for those of you under 30 who have no idea what a Kodak moment is, this is not an Instagram-worthy moment for David. All right? Well, let's pick up the story. Verse 1, 1 Samuel 21. David went to the town of Nob. He's on the run to see Ahimelech, the priest. Ahimelech trembled when he saw him. Why? Because David's got quite a reputation. He's a giant slayer. Why are you alone? He asked. Why is no one with you? Well, the king has sent me on a private matter, David said. He told me not to tell anyone why I'm here. I have told my men where to meet me later. What's David doing here? In one word, he's lying. Yeah. Bible hero David starting to crack. And he lies. He's not on a super duper secret mission for King Saul. He's running for his life from King Saul. And what happens next in verse 6, we're not going to look at it, is that David asks for food because he's hungry. And all that the priest has is some holy bread, this consecrated, this sacred bread that's meant to be used for other things. And he gives it to David out of fear. And guess what David does? He eats it. This is not kosher, what David does. He takes holy bread and he eats it. And then on top of that, he asks this priest, Ahimelech, do you have any weapons? And Ahimelech has only one weapon. Pick up verse 9. Verse 9, he says, I only have the sword of Goliath. The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, the priest replied. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Take that if you want it, for there is nothing else here. There is nothing like it, David replied. Give it to me. Now, is there something wrong with this picture right here? Yeah, there's something very, very wrong. David did not need a sword or a spear to kill Goliath in the first place. And now David is freaking out. David has lost his focus. David has lost his perspective. And now he's resorting to the only weapon that's available in the area. And it just happens to be the spear of Goliath. And I just want to ask you, Crossroads Church, where is the David who said, the Lord does not need weapons to rescue his people? Where is that David that we looked at just last weekend together? What's happened here? What's happened here? And I think the very simple answer to what happened here is that David has lost his God focus. And he walked in that battlefield. We saw this last weekend. The only one looking at God, the only one talking about God. And now all of a sudden, David has lost his focus on God. And I'm here to tell you that it's so easy to do. When the lights go out, when the bottom of life drops, when things all of a sudden aren't fair anymore, it is so easy for us, isn't it, to lose our focus in God. But things don't get any better. In fact, in verse 10, as we pick up the story, it gets worse. So David escaped from Saul and went to King Achish of Gath. Now just circle that in your brain right now. But the officers of Achish were unhappy about his being there. Isn't this like David? They said, the king of the land. He's not quite the king yet. They asked, isn't he the one the people honor with dances, singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s? How many have a cheer based after your life? No, nobody, but David did. And David is 10,000. David heard these comments and was very afraid of what King Achish of Gath might do to him. So he pretended to be insane, scratching on doors and drooling down his beard. Finally, King Achish said to his men, must you bring me a madman? We already have enough of them around here. If you don't think there's humor in the Bible, just start reading it. There's a lot of humor in the Bible. Why should I let someone like this be my guest? Isn't it interesting now that David loses his God focus, and all of a sudden now he runs in fear to the land, to Gath. Who was from Gath? Goliath was from Gath. They are enemies of God's people, and that's where David runs to find some sort of solace or protection. We don't know. He runs to Gath, and I think it's just so comical that the king, as David pretends he's insane, says, hey, I got enough nutcases around here of my own. And what you probably don't know, that back in this ancient world, if someone was insane, they believed that people who were insane brought bad luck to wherever they were at. So of course they're escorting David out. But let's just take a little pause here. Take a pause. Take a drink. I want you to think about this. What's going on here? Because David has gone from Miller time to cave time all of a sudden, because that's what happens next. Is David runs. He runs to a cave to hide. He gets kicked out of Nob or whatever it's called, this Gath area, and he runs to a cave. He runs to the wilderness of Judea, and he ends up in what's called, and I've got a picture here, the cave of Adullam. Now, just so you know, you can visit this today. I mean, it's a national park. This is where you'll stand. And this is the area, the region that David runs into. And there's the cave that David in chapter 22 of 1 Samuel, it's where he gets to. Again, he's gone from Miller time. Everything's woo, 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 woo. To now all of a sudden he's in a cave. What's going on? And I'll say it again. David has lost his God focus. Hard times tend to knock us off our game. And David now runs. He's in a cave. He's all alone. He's empty-handed. And I want you to think about this because I want you to feel what David's feeling. He was living in a palace, best food, best wine, friends, family. It was all there for him. And now he's in a cave. And now he's in a cave. And maybe that's where some of you find yourself today. Oh, you're not in a literal cave, but maybe you're somewhere that you never dreamed that you would be. You're somewhere that you don't want to be. You're in your own version of a cave. And I wrote a definition for you of a cave. A cave is somewhere you end up when something treasured has been taken from you. A cave is where you end up when something treasured, something precious, something special has just been ripped, maybe from you. And for some of you, maybe that's your health. Or maybe for some of you, it's your marriage. Or maybe for some of you, what's been ripped from you is your self-esteem or your self-respect. Or maybe your job's been taken from you. Your source of income has been taken from you. Or maybe you literally lost a loved one recently. A son or a daughter, a dad or a mom, a grandma or a grandpa. Maybe what you've lost, what's been taken from you is peace of mind. Now you're anxious. Now you're fearful. Maybe what's taken from you is any kind of hope for the future. Maybe what's been taken from you is your innocence. But something's been taken from you. And I've been a pastor now for 36 years, and I've got to watch hundreds of followers of Jesus end up in caves. I've had a front row seat just to watch how people enter a cave and how they exit a cave. And as I've watched and watched for over 3 decades of people ending up in caves, my conclusion is very simply this: caves either develop our character or they destroy our character. They are where our faith either breaks apart, breaks up, or it's where our faith gets built up. And sadly, I'll just say this sadly, I've seen far more people, I've seen their faith shattered in caves versus built up in caves. I've seen far too many followers of Jesus walk away from faith after ending up in a cave. And it behooves me. I think about this. Why do people walk away from faith when they end up in a cave? And the only answer I can give you today is because they bought into a lie that some preacher like me has told them. That somewhere along the way, they've heard a preacher stand behind a podium or a pulpit and say, come to Jesus. Come to Jesus and your life will be well. Come to Jesus and you will get a get out of the cave for free card. Come to Jesus and God the Father's business will be all about keeping you from a cave-free life. And friends, I'm here to tell you today that if you've heard that, it's bogus. It's bogus. It's not true at all. But if you think it's true and then all of a sudden you end up in a cave, the lights are out, the bottom of life drops out, you're going to walk away because God's disappointed you, because God's deserted you, because God hasn't done what you thought God was supposed to do. And I'm so glad that even though David doesn't get it all right, oh yeah, he lies, yeah. He eats holy bread, yeah. He grabs Goliath's sword instead of trusting God, yeah. He acts like a madman, yeah. He does all that, but what David doesn't do he doesn't walk away in the darkness. He shows us a better way than to walk away. And that's what I want for you. And that's what I want for me. When the sun stops shining, when the birds quit singing, when the flowers quit blooming, when the fish stop biting, I want you to hang on to God in the darkness, just like David did. Why? We're going to see this so clearly next week because God does good things. God does good things in caves. Now, what you might not know is that David was more than just a giant slayer. David was more than just a shepherd boy. He's also a very skilled musician, but he was also a poet or a writer. In fact, there's a book in the Bible called Psalms, not Psalms, but Psalms. And there's 150 of them. And David wrote 75 of these psalms, these poems, these songs that the ancient Israelites would sing in their worship services. And 3 of these psalms that David wrote of the 75, he wrote in the cave of Adullam. David wrote 3 of these psalms while he was sitting in a cave, in the darkness, damp, cold. I mean, he writes 3 of these. And I love it, the fact that we found 3 of these from the cave, because we don't have to wonder, we don't have to imagine, we don't have to try to dream up. What was David feeling right now? What was David feeling right now? We don't have to imagine that. And I want you right now, because I'm going to look at one of these. I want you just to put yourself in David's sandals right now. You're in a cave right now. It's dark. It's cold. It's damp. It's wet. And you build a big fire. And you're sitting on a stone. And the flames, the shadows from the flames are bouncing off the cave walls. And maybe you can hear the drip, 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 drip of the water. And David, he sits down, feeling all that he's feeling. And he pens these words in Psalm 142. He writes these words, I cry out to the Lord. I plead for the Lord's mercy. I pour out my complaints before him and tell him all my troubles. When I am overwhelmed, you alone know the way I should turn. Wherever I go, my enemies have set traps for me. I look for someone to come and help me, but no one gives me a passing thought. No one will help me. No one cares a bit about what happens to me. You know what David's modeling for us? You know what flawed and famous Dave is showing us right here? In one word, it's the word honesty. He's just being real. He's just being raw. He's just being authentic before God. And I just love this honesty, don't you? This vulnerability, this realness that comes from David. He's not sugarcoating what he's saying to God. He's not saying a bunch of religious, pious platitudes to God. No, he's basically saying, God, do you give a rip about me? Because it sure doesn't seem like you do. God, I'm here. I'm all alone. I'm dying here, God. Where are you? Where are you? And can I ask you, when's the last time you talked to God that way? Oh, Pastor Phil, I can't talk. Yeah, you can. Famous Dave, Bible hero Dave did. I think God actually likes those kinds of prayers instead of the phony baloney prayers that we say all the time. I think God is honored when we are real and honest with him. And David goes on in this psalm. He goes on and he writes in verse 5, he says, then I pray to you, O Lord. I say, you are my place of refuge. You are all I really want in life. Hear my cry, for I am low, very low. Rescue me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, this prison that I'm in right now, so I can thank you. And what is David modeling for us now? I think it's in one word. I think it's the word hope. It's hope. Yeah, this is not a Kodak, Instagram-worthy moment in David's life, what we just looked at. But he does some things well, doesn't he? He does not let go of hope. David holds on to God in the darkness of the cave. He just holds on. And he says, God, I'm not letting go. Because God, if I'm going to be rescued right now from this prison that I'm in, it's going to be because of you. And that's what I want you to do when you find yourself in a cave and the lights are out and you feel all alone and you don't know how it's going to end. I want you to hang on, just like David did. Because the good news is, and we're going to see this next weekend, good things do happen in caves. In fact, God does some of his best work right in the middle of a cold, dark, damp cave. And I think if David were here today talking to us, I think what he would say to us is this: it's okay for you to temporarily lose sight of God. It's okay for you, Crossroads, to question. It's okay for you to have your doubts. It's okay to temporarily lose sight of God, as long as you don't permanently lose hope in God. It's okay to temporarily lose sight of God, just as long as you don't permanently lose hope in God. And so, my fellow cave dwellers, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. Hang on in the darkness, because God does some of his best work in our lives through the cave time. And to illustrate that, to push it out a little bit further, I want you to watch with me Lexi's story.
Hi, I'm Lexi. I'm a graphic design intern here at Crossroads, and this is my story. When I was around 6 years old, on the way home from church, I was in the car with my mom, and that's when I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. But I would say that I never really understood the full grasp of Jesus. In 8th grade, the happy childhood I knew of quickly changed and turned a corner. I received a phone call from my mom saying that my grandma passed away, and this just broke my whole entire world. My happy parents are, no longer there for me. My mom also became an alcoholic at this time. I would not see my mom for days or weeks at end. I just remember staying home from school all the time, just taking care of my mom and just scared that my mom would drink herself away. As a freshman in high school, my mom moved out of the household. After my mom moved out of the house, I fell into a deep, dark depression. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. I would just verbally say to God, if you're a good God, why would you do this to me? And I started to find my value in boys, in relationships, in drugs, and I lived my life like this for a whole entire year. I woke up one day and I just knew I couldn't do it anymore. I woke up just saying I'm done, and nothing is helping. Nothing is filling this void. And that day I planned to commit suicide. And I would go to school and just put on a smile on my face and then come home and just say goodbye. By the grace of God, I texted my mom and I told her saying goodbye and telling her how I was feeling. And thank the Lord that my mom called the school and pulled me out of school, and I was hospitalized for a couple weeks. And that is where I found the Lord, was in the hospital. There was a Bible on my nightstand, and I just stared at it for a couple days, knowing that I should open it up. But I just felt this shame come in, and not wanting to turn to God because I was embarrassed of the life that I had been living. And then there's one night where I was sitting in bed and I was just sobbing, kind of confused where I should go next. That's when I decided to turn to the Lord and, call out to him and just weep with him. And I remember a distinct moment where God called out to me and said, "Daughter, come home. Come home to me and come to my stretched out arms." And that night I recommitted my life to Christ, and I have never looked back since. After recommitting my life to Christ, I wanted to do everything and anything to find more about the Lord. That is when I went to a Bible camp, and that is when I truly fell in love with God and just how good he is. After going to the Bible camp, I knew I wanted to get baptized to proclaim my faith to everyone about how good Jesus is, and there's freedom in getting baptized. After that summer, I went to college, and this is part of my life where my life just took a turn for the good. That year, my mom began going to rehab and getting clean. Right now, she's over 5 months sober, and I lived this past summer of just seeing God's goodness and how faithful God is. Here I am 7 years later, a completely new person. Just what baptism is just transforming and just becoming what God says you are. I am just really looking forward to seeing what God is going to continue to do in my life through it all and through the hills and the valleys, and just always having that firm foundation set upon Jesus.